of Realtors contract index jumped 2.1% in February, but that still does not make up for a nearly 3% drop back in January. Well, my next guest is a skeptic of the NRA's data and says its forecasts are a, quote, joke. He doesn't mince his words. We're talking about Reggie Middleton. He correctly predicted the market was headed toward collapse back in the fall of 2007. He writes a very popular blog now called Boom Bust Blog, and he joins me now here in the studio live. Reggie, great to have you in here. Let's talk about this morning's data. I mean, the National Association of Realtors isn't the only group coordinating data that you don't think is particularly reliable.
Correct. I don't think that the Case-Shiller index is reliable as an indicator of the downward movement of housing prices, for a very different reason than I'm negative on the National Association of Realtors. Be aware that the NAR is a lobbying group for realtors, so they have an implicit incentive to be overly optimistic, where the Case-Shiller is basically an empirical index.
Right, but the numbers are so bleak. It's hard to say that there's a lot of optimism built in there, but what specifically about this morning's number didn't you agree with? Were you surprised or not?
Well, it's not necessarily that I didn't agree with the numbers itself, it's the source of the numbers. If you take a look at the output from the NAR over the last 5 or 10 years, they were very bullish at the peak of the housing boom. Their chief economist recommended that you purchase stock at the peak of the dot-com bubble, and their newest economist has proclaimed that we're at this is a good time to buy a house for the last 4 years since the bubble popped.
And what do you think about Case-Shiller?
Case-Shiller?
We get those numbers tomorrow. They're released tomorrow.
Case-Shiller is a mathematical marvel. The problem is it was designed to smooth out volatility and noise in housing prices. In smoothing said noise out, it extracts or excludes the most negative portions of the housing market, such as real estate-owned properties, foreclosures, investor flips, detached housing. Most of those properties, condos, have been falling much faster than the average single-family attached house, which is what Case-Shiller measures.
Well, you're not the only one talking about the effect of foreclosures on a lot of this data. Tell me what your outlook is and what reports you do look at closely as a way to predict what the housing market is going to do.
What we do is we crunch our own numbers. I have a small team of analysts, and we take a look at several indexes and indices and reports, and we run our own shadow inventory analysis. The shadow inventory is basically the inventory that does not come up in your MLS listing, and what we see is a significant amount of shadow inventory. Over the last quarter or two, it has actually leveled out. That nominally on the surface, that sounds like good news.
What typically falls into the shadow inventory? Are those foreclosed upon properties, or those ones that are not listed with a broker? Right,
not listed with the broker through MLS, foreclosed upon properties, REOs, properties in significant distress, 60 to 90 days, 90 days plus past due, etc. The leveling out of the shadow inventory is actually a negative because you've had either voluntary or involuntary moratorium on foreclosures due to the fraudulent signing of documents and affidavits. So even though you haven't been putting foreclosures in the foreclosure mill, the foreclosure mill has not shrunk significantly.
Is it getting bigger?
It's not getting bigger, but it's going to spike when you start recognizing foreclosures again. Think about pouring water into a drain with a drain open. You pour the water in, normally it comes out. We've stopped pouring water in, but the water's not coming out. So when you start pouring water in again, it's going to overflow. And
so do you think that that is going to be overwhelmingly the biggest factor in a housing recovery? We have to clear through this shadow inventory before we can really see stable, long-term upticks in the housing market overall? Well,
there are several variables that plug in. You have inventory, which shadow inventory is a significant amount. You have housing demand, and you have the ability to finance and credit. As of right now, each and every one of those variables are significantly or negative. You have relatively sparse demand, you have a significant supply, and the credit metrics, the banks definitely aren't in a position to do any significant lending, and they're much more stringent than they used to be, which was the lack of the stringent underwriting is what caused the boom in the first place.
So what catalysts are you looking at when you think of a turnaround point?
Well, I don't think of a turnaround point. I try to be as agnostic as possible. I look to see where it's going. I try not to assume where it's going. If you take a look at the Japanese housing market, they're in their 22nd year of a downturn. So it's definitely not inconceivable to believe that we're going to go down more than a few years. As of right now, we've crunched shadow inventory. As of last quarter, take about 6.9 years to clear out shadow inventory. And that's without the foreclosures over the last 2 to 3 quarters being added in.
All right. Close to 7 years to clear out of this shadow inventory. All right, Reggie, thank you so much. Always love your insight. Thanks for joining us here. That was Reggie Middleton, founder and editor of Boom Bust blog.